This is the most underrated movie in the MonsterVerse.
A lot of the MonsterVerse movies are loved for different reasons. Godzilla 2014 because there are a lot of MonsterVerse purists who like the darker theme.
Godzilla King of the Monsters for attempting to modernize the old classic Godzilla films.
Godzilla vs. Kong for the fight scenes, and Godzilla X Kong because of recency bias.
But today we'll be talking about the most overlooked movie by far, Kong Skull Island!
Hello everyone, I am Inspector Keto.
And I am Detective Mio, and today's investigation will provide concrete evidence that Kong Skull Island is massively underrated.
You can clearly see that Kong Skull Island gets the least amount of votes on our community polls, and that's actually pretty sad. Interestingly enough though, despite never being talked about, Kong Skull Island is actually the most successful MonsterVerse movie.
What?
Allow me to explain. The film was made on a budget of $185 million, which would be over $229 million approximately with inflation. And the gross revenue was $568.6 million, which equates to $724.5 million now.
Against our odds, I'm pretty sure Skull Island is actually still the highest grossing movie in the MonsterVerse, even including Godzilla X Kong.
That is when you adjust for inflation. So King Kong's IP still has some sway with the audience.
Riz, as the kids are saying these days.
Oh my gosh. And the basic survival type story managed to bring in the audience.
As for us, we didn't see the movie in theaters, since at the time we weren't really in the habit of watching movies in theaters very often. Instead, we got a copy on DVD later, and we watched it with our family. A few days later, we watched it again with other family.
The first time we saw it, it was rather entertaining, though not the greatest movie I've ever seen. But, despite the second viewing being so close to the first time, it was still fairly engaging.
It's a surprisingly well-paced movie. While the first big monster part only happens like 40 minutes into the movie, like a lot of MonsterVerse films, it manages to keep you from getting bored. That being said, we would occasionally leave the room to briefly do something else during the first 40 minutes. Because during the first 40 minutes of the movie, we get acquainted with our characters and the story setup.
There is a rather interestingly shot opening scene that introduces US fighter pilot Hank Marlowe and Japanese fighter pilot Gunpei Ikari as they crash on Skull Island in 1944 during the events of World War II. They try to kill each other, and I cringe every time Hank cuts his hands trying to block Gunpei's sword. Ugh.
We find out later in the movie that they grew close and became like brothers as they were stranded together on the deadly Skull Island, with only the native iwi for company, and the iwi aren't much for conversation.
That sounds like a pretty interesting story, but unfortunately that's not the story we're telling today. Unlucky! Instead, the story ends up skipping almost 3 decades to the main meat of the movie. But still, the story about Gunpei and Hank on the island would be pretty interesting. Flash forward to 1973, and it's time to meet our main cast. And I must say, there's a surprising amount of big names in this movie.
The scientists include the expedition leader, Bill Rhonda. He's played by John Goodman, who is a super well-known actor. He's just there to find evidence of kaiju to secure funding for Monarch. So this movie fits right in as a prequel to Godzilla 2014. Continuity is something that's often forgotten in the MonsterVerse's later entries, and that's very sad.
Brooks and San are 2 minor characters who are part of Randa's team. They are scientists, although they don't do a whole lot of science stuff. They're really just background characters, but they aren't offensive. There are a couple of other science characters, but they don't really matter, and one of them dies getting torn to shreds.
One of the arguable lead characters is James Conrad, played by Tom Hiddleston. The second lead would probably be Mason Weaver, played by Brie Larson.
Then we have the military guys, the military blokes, starting with Preston Packard, who is, not just played by, is Samuel L. Jackson. My man is in everything and anything. No, my man is in anything and everything.
He plays a colonel who's a bit miffed about the failed Vietnam War and how he has nothing to show for his service. He's looking for a new war and he finds one against Kong.
That's pretty much just Packard who feels that way though. The rest of the military guys, such as Slivko, Cole, Mills, and Chapman, are just following orders and would really like to go home.
Altogether, nothing groundbreaking character-wise, but some of the characters aren't quite cardboard cutouts. Amazing!
It's close.
And nobody is too annoying, though when they went into Hank Marlowe later on, his island fever starts to become a little bit irritating, but at least he's not boring like the lead characters.
But we have to keep this positive. In an on-set interview with director Jordan Vlog Roberts, I think I said that correctly, he says that his inspiration was to place a bunch of different characters, who would have been in different movies, together and throw them into a crazy situation on Skull Island.
I see what he was going for, I think, maybe, I'm not sure. I just don't know if it panned out though.
Positive!
When we finally reach the monster part 40 minutes in, it is no disappointment, depending of course on what you were expecting.
Not gonna lie, most of the MonsterVerse movies seem a little over-determined to delay the monster reveal as much as possible. And it's almost always exactly 40 minutes in.
I'm not saying it's necessarily bad because clearly the formula works, but it is kind of annoying that it's always like, oh, time to go sit back and watch humans do stuff for about 40 minutes until we get to the good stuff. But if the human stuff is good, I don't really care. It just never is.
The investigation team starts dropping bombs in Kong's house, and Kong responds by politely knocking each one of the copters out of the air, killing multiple nameless characters.
It's a very striking, action-packed scene, and if you haven't seen it, I'd actually recommend giving it a watch. The sound design brings it all together. The way the music fades in and out and back in and stuff, and the helicopter blades going in slow motion, the radio chatter, it's all quite nice.
And Kong looks awesome.
There was a lot of work that went into this film, and a good deal of it went into Kong. The animation team over at Industrial Light and Magic wanted to give more detail to Kong's face, so they used this dude to pull some expressions and do some movements so they would have something to reference.
I think it worked out pretty well, as Kong has been one of the most sympathetic and expressive characters in the MonsterVerse. The animators also spent a lot of time on his hair, something the Godzilla animators don't have to worry about, and they made sure to keep all the battle damage that Kong sustains throughout the film to maintain continuity.
After getting the butts handed to them by Kong, the team is split up. One side with Packard, Rhonda, and some other guys head to their weapons to meet up with Chapman, who was separated somehow during the Kong battle. They want to get the firepower they need to kill Kong, while the rest, including James and Mason, meet up with stranded Hank Marlowe and the Iwi tribe.
Hey, Big Smoke! It's me, Carl! Chill!
While with the tribe, they learned that Kong is instrumental in keeping the island in balance and preventing the takeover of the Skull Crawlers.
There's a lot of attention to detail when it comes to the natives, despite the Iwi not playing a massive role in the movie. The Iwi scenes actually felt realistic, and for that reason I will give it many points. That being said, as far as characters to follow, they're pretty boring.
They learned from the Iwi that Kong's parents used to guard the island, but a huge skull crawler, in the wiki it's called Skull Devil, came up and made them expire prematurely. So, Kong grew up and something happened. Now he apparently is large enough to fight the Skull Devil? Even though he isn't as big as his two parents were? And the Skull Devil is just sleeping off a hangover underneath the island or something? I don't know. But the little ones still come up.
Those bombs woke up a bunch of them.
Oh. Okay.
This movie has a lot of unanswered questions and plot holes, and the origin of Kong creates at least a dozen. At least the movie doesn't dwell on it too long, so I don't scratch my head in confusion the whole movie. Wait, what were we talking about? Oh yes! Kong Skull Island is the most underrated MonsterVerse movie!
While on their various adventures, they meet all kinds of ghastly creatures, including the Spore Mantis, the Psychobats, Mother Longlegs, and one of my personal favorites, the Skyer Buffalo. It's a really big buffalo, and buffalo are cool.
The designs are pretty well thought out, and the filmmakers created a monstrous but somewhat believable ecosystem for Skull Island, which they put into various creature bios to promote interest in the film.
These creatures were rendered with some pretty nice CGI that has aged relatively well and is better than the latest MonsterVerse CGI in our humble opinion. Credit to ILM and their other collaborators. Along with these computer-generated images, a lot of scenes use practical effects or real on-set locations.
Get this, they shot primarily in 3 places: Hawaii, Australia, and Vietnam. They did this so they could show that Skull Island has different and unique flora and landscapes. I kinda get what they're going for, but a lot of what is said in the special features and interviews kinda sound like they're just trying to make up stuff to justify this movie existing, which to be fair is understandable. The utilization of the on-location shots were pretty well done, even if I didn't pay attention to it the first time I watched the movie.
The cinematography really makes this movie stand out. Larry Fong, the DP, has been behind the camera for many VFX-heavy blockbuster shoots, including Batman vs. Superman, Super 8, and one of the worst movies ever made. These skills he picked up over his career show themselves in this film, as it contains a lot of high contrast shots, sometimes with the subject as silhouette for very striking visuals, and for the majority of the movie, very natural looking shots.
Back to the story. The two groups meet up with each other after sustaining some losses, some of which were incredibly random. Rather than escaping though, Packard insists they go find Chapman. This plan unfortunately takes them through the Kong Boneyard, where they're attacked by a skull crawler. Quirky, mate.
This action scene is rather stylistic as always, almost to the point of being kind of cheesy. Sheesh.
Sword!
Randa dies kind of randomly, and a few other random soldiers get killed as well. This scene does a good job of showing just how dangerous the skull crawlers are, but otherwise the scene doesn't really accomplish much.
Except James finds Chapman's dog tags amongst some other vomited bones and disgusting stuff, and determines that the man is more than likely dead.
He dead! Oh, he dead for sure!
He did in fact die several scenes ago, which is odd because we had a few random scenes of just him being lost on the island while making verbal letters to his son back home. Still don't know what the goal with all that was. I personally think it would have been better if Chapman dying was off screen, but I'm not the director. That job goes to Jordan Vogt Roberts.
Anyway, Packard goes after the weapons, despite no longer needing to rescue Chapman, much to the protest of some characters who just want to leave. I just want to go home, man. He lets James, Mason, Hank, and the other 2 scientists go ahead to the beach for extraction after some convincing, and it's clear that Packard has lost it, but the soldiers stand by their commander through thick and thin. The movie clearly wants you to root for Team Kong, and they almost do too good of a job at giving all the characters believable and somewhat understandable motivations for wanting to kill him. Because, if I'm being honest, the whole movie could not convince me to be on Team Kong. I think they should have killed the monkey.
That night, Mason boops Kong's snoot. Aww, I guess I'm on Team Kong now. In a rather strange scene, all things considered, but Kong is distracted by an explosion caused by Packard. Then we get this line.
Where are you two going?
We're going to save Kong.
Oh, kiss off!
Packard and company try to burn and blow up Kong, but James and Mason step in to interfere, and the soldiers switch sides after hearing the Sigma-based arguments.
Kong destroys Packard to keep the rating PG-13.
Die, you motherfucker.
And rises to fight the Skull Devil that was woken by the explosion. Now, we don't know for sure if this is the same creature that killed his parents, but we're going to assume so. If you want the true origins of Kong, have to play the hit AAA game, Skull Island: Rise of Kong. In fact, if this video gets 1,000 likes, we still won't play the game.
The fight between Kong and the Skullcrawlers, and when he fights the Skull Devil in this scene, are some of the best choreographed in the MonsterVerse. They are all visible and easy to follow. The CGI rendering is really good, although some things look a little weird and goofy, especially when they're compositing human characters, or when Mason shoots off a flare. One of the movie moments of all time.
Kong's fighting style is unique from Godzilla and other kaiju in the way that he uses weapons. Not many Kong moments are more bad butt than when he strips off a whole giant tree to make a club. Godzilla, of course, is cooler, but people can sometimes forget that Kong can be pretty neat himself.
Accomplishing the fight with the Skull Devil was no simple thing. According to the animation supervisor Scott Benza, via the article written by Ian Fales, I sure hope I said that correctly, this scene took 2 months and 3 to 4 animators working on multiple sequences at the same time.
One large challenge was animating the Skull Devil and the other Skull Crawlers, since they only had 2 limbs and a tail. The team referenced movements from Komodo dragons, deer, and other long-necked mammals to create the movements. During the fight, the devil used its tail in a serpentine fashion to grapple with Kong, leading to a very interesting and unique kaiju fight scene.
So if nothing else, we should appreciate this film for the work that went into it. You know, if you want to. In the end, Kong defeats the Skull Devil, twice, and then goes on his way, and the remaining humans make it off the island safely. Hank goes back home to his family, and a touching conclusion, and the post-credit scene hints at the rise of the organization Monarch, and teases the battle that will occur in Godzilla, King of the Monsters. Pretty hype.
So overall, the movie does what it sets out to do, a genre mash movie that creates a unique King Kong experience. Does it break new ground and create a Nolan-style confusing spectacle with a lot of unexpected twists?
No! Was it well written?
No!
Does it have good characters?
Not really!
But it wasn't trying.
The movie at its core is a big, dumb action movie, but executed better than some other MonsterVerse movies like... It takes itself not too seriously, but doesn't get really stupid, I guess?
In our opinion, this is a pretty good kaiju flick, especially if you like monster action or are a fan of King Kong. After watching the film again, we noticed a whole lot of problems, but we still walked away with a good experience.
Is this movie forgettable? Maybe, but that's kind of part of its charm. You can go watch it again, it's like, huh, I kind of forgot that was in there.
I forgot this movie existed for the last 7 years.
Dang, I'm kind of feeling old. Anyways, this film has earned its place in the MonsterVerse, and you people need to stop disrespecting it.
But that concludes this investigation, and hopefully we've convinced you that Kong Skull Island is in fact rather underrated. And if you're interested in some more kaiju-related content, feel free to click on this video over here.
If you want another investigation-style video, check out this one over here. I think it turned out pretty well. Until we see you there, he's Detective Mio.
And he's Inspector Keto.
And we hope that you have a blessed day.
Bye!